So in this video, I'm going to talk about applying effects and then keyframing those effects, which will be particularly relevant to Studio 7. And so because this is required in Studio 7, I'm going to demonstrate using the still images. So if you recall, I brought in two sets of media, essentially. I brought in still images and I brought in actual video files. Audio as well. What I'm going to do actually is create a new sequence to complete or demonstrate keyframing for Studio 7. But again, this is relevant to Studio 8 and 9 as well, because you'll be applying effects potentially in those studios as well. So let's get started. I'm going to create a new sequence, and that's pretty straightforward. What I want to do is go to Sequences, and then just right click, make empty sequence. Okay, and there's my sequence 2. And if I double click on it, we see our empty sequence. What I'll do is call this sequence Studio 7. Okay. And for Studio 7, the images that I'm going to be working with are the still images that I downloaded here. Now, here's a key point. You're going to want to download still images that have pretty high resolution. So you're going to want to make sure that those images that you bring in are in the neighborhood of like 2,000 and 3,000 pixels, wide or high. So that'll just give you more resolution to work with, right? Because we're going to be zooming in and zooming out of these images, and we don't want to introduce interpolation. Remember interpolation? So I've got my still images here, and first let me demonstrate that these clips are actually pretty high resolution. So I'm going to just click on the log tab here, and then let's go to this image and Media, Reveal, and it should come up in my Finder here. And I can see in the Finder, that it's 3,794 pixels by 2,691 pixels. So that's pretty high res. That's what I want. So keep in mind, I'm working within like, a 720 frame, 1280 720. So the resolution of the images I'm working with are quite a bit more than that. And what that affords me the opportunity to do is apply the so-called Ken Burns effect, where I can zoom into the image without it degrading in resolution, or I can start zoomed in on an image and then start zooming out to reveal, okay, and without any sort of noticeable quality degradation of the image. That's the whole point of having sort of these high resolution images to work with. First, let's bring some clips into the timeline, so you should know how to do that. And I'm going to bring in a 5-second clip. So basically I want each of the clips to be 5 seconds long. And so look at the time time code here, and I'll point to it. And so that's about 5 seconds. Okay, I'm going to make an out point there. Okay, and then I'm going to make an in point. I need to press the right button for sure. So let's say there's 5 seconds. 5 seconds, 7 frames. There's my out point. And then hit V on the keyboard, and I'll bring that down. Let's zoom in on that. There's basically a 5-second clip now. S on the keyboard, and let me bring in another one here, and I'll just bring all these in as 5 seconds. They're not all exactly 5 seconds. They're 5 seconds and a certain amount of frames. So that's what we have so far, and of course they're all still images, so when I play through, everything's pretty much static. 5 seconds, and you can see the cut points. Okay, so how do we make this composition a little bit more kinetic, animated? Let's apply some effects and then some keyframes. So here's our edit, and what we want to do actually is go over to the Visual Effects tab here, and so I'm going to click on it. And a new window comes up, and so let me scrub through and just to make sure everything's there. There's the first couple shots, right? So we see our timeline down here, And I can adjust these windows, of course. Okay, so what I want to do starting out is I want to be zoomed in, and then I want to reveal. Okay, so I'm going to apply an effect to be able to do that, essentially scaling. So how do I do that? So notice that my playhead is over this clip here. And so then what I want to do is click on the plus button here, add new effects. And you can see now the effects come up that are, these are text effects that Lightworks supports. I know they're text effects because they're categorized over here in this tab. What I want is digital DVE, digital video effects. And then I want to go to 2DVE. All right. And this will give me the control that I'm looking for. All right. And so I double clicked on that. And now what I want to do is point your attention to the parameters here. The position, XY, scaling, master, XY, cropping. Okay. And so the effect has been applied to this clip. I know that because I can see that little blue box in the upper left-hand corner of the clip. Okay. Now, but the effect isn't doing anything. What I want to do is actually keyframe this effect so that again it reveals. So I want to start zoomed in and then back out to reveal the image. But I don't want to back out so far as to introduce these black bars. Okay, but I know that I have enough resolution. So what I'm going to do is basically enable the scaling here, keyframe. So enable, disable keyframes. I want to enable X. Actually, I'm just going to enable the master here, and the master will control the X and Y axis. So make sure that your playhead is at the beginning of the clip, and remember A and S, so A, and there's the beginning of the clip. Okay, and then what I want to do is zoom in using the scale here, and I'm just sliding it. Remember, keyframes are enabled. Now watch what happens. In too much, it's interpolation. You can see the image start to break down. And I'm just going to kind of eyeball it here, and that looks pretty good. All right, and then the next thing, I need to go to the end of the clip, so I'm going to hit S on the keyboard. And what it shows me, of course, is the beginning of the next clip. So what I want to do is back up a frame, and this is the last frame of the clip 223 here. Okay, that's the last frame. So now what I want to do is zoom in so that the black bars disappear. Okay. So basically this is my end point. So it's going to zoom out to this frame. Okay. And to see what the effect will be, all I have to do is scrub through the clip. Okay. So this is where it's going to start. And then as the 5-second duration passes, it's going to zoom out. Like so. So we can see the keyframes and the values that have been added using the Graphs tab here. Those are essentially the keyframes that have been added by making the adjustment to the master scale here. So as soon as I made the adjustment, a keyframe was added, so we can see that. So let's say I move the playhead here, and I want at this point in the timeline, I want it to be at a particular scale. So let's just, for demonstration, so I'll move the playhead here, and then I'll make an adjustment, okay? So now if I go back to the Graphs tab, we can see that that keyframe has been added, all right? And the playhead is directly on the keyframe. But let's say I don't want the value to be 257, I want the value to be 2.0. I can enter it there, and we can see that it adjusted in the window there, all right? All right, so that's basically how the graph works. So you can go in and make fine-tune adjustments. Command Z, I'll just back up a couple steps because all I want really is the reveal. Okay, now I'm going to go through and keyframe the next clip, and just to create a nice little bit of an edit here. So I'm zooming out here, and then what I want to do here is something a little bit more complex. I want to zoom in, but I want to zoom in not to the center of the image, which is what's happening actually in this clip. It's zooming out from the center. What I want to do is actually zoom out from a particular point in the image or portion of the image. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and apply the effect again, 2DVE, to this clip. Just double click on it. And now I want to enable position XY, and I want to enable the master scale here. So now I'm dealing with 3 additional parameters. Okay, so again, let's go to the last frame. This is where I want the composition to essentially end, is that last frame. I haven't made an adjustment yet, but let's say I want the scaling to be right here. That's where I want to land. Because again, I want to remove those black bars. Okay, we can see just in the graphs panel here that it's added the keyframe. All right, and then let's go back to the first frame. Where do I want it to start? Okay, I want it to start, let's zoom in. Okay, so yeah, that'd be good. And then, but I want to adjust the XY coordinate slightly. And let's see, that's about right. I'd like that M to kind of be more in the center. Right, of the frame. Okay, let's see what the result is. Let's check our graphs panel just for fun. All right, we can see that the XY or the X has been, keyframes have been added. All right, so let's take a look at how all this cuts together. Now you can see that it's zooming out from that particular point. Okay, so it's a little bit more interesting in terms of the way that it's animated. It's not just a straight zoom out on one axis. Okay, or from the center of the composition. Okay. So now I'm just going to go through and add a few more keyframes to these clips. And then what I'll do is add some transitions between these clips. And here's the result so far. And before we go much farther, I'm going to make a small change here. And so I'm zooming out in all of these images. So what I want to do actually is go modify this so that I'm actually zooming in on the M as opposed to zooming out. So you see it's zooming out. So that'll just provide some visual contrast and a little bit, another layer of sophistication for the work. So it's pretty straightforward. And click on visual effects. And then what I want to do is actually look at the graphs for the keyframes. The position X and Y, let's go in and change the scale first. So let's see, the value is 133 where it ends. So I want it to be 133, okay, and then 2.29. So remember 2.29, 133, and 2.29, 1.33, and then 2.29. Okay, so now we're going to zoom in, and we also need to make an alteration with to the position X variable here. So that's where we're going to end now. And notice where the it's basically 0.8, right? So we can just fill in that value like so. And then let's back up to the first keyframe, and I'm just going to drag it in this case. So don't want to see the black bars is the idea. And so now the effect is altogether different. So let's take a look. Looks good. So let's add some transitions. It's pretty easy to do. What I'm going to do is essentially just right-click on the cut, and you know you're on the cut when you see the staples. If you right-click on it, and a menu will come up, Add Transitions. Okay, and let's go to a dissolve. That'll be nice. A on the keyboard. Again, right-click, Add Dissolve. And then let's add another dissolve. And of course, well, let's make this one a wipe. The wipes are quite nice. So nice. Nice dissolve. And another dissolve. Okay. And dissolves are just classic. It's a classic transition, and it's really smooth, and it helps the flow. Okay, and now to the question that is no doubt on everybody's mind. How do you fade in and fade out picture? Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. We've already added the transitions here. So if I want to fade out to create a conclusion, what is a fade in? A fade in indicates a beginning. Fade out indicates the conclusion of a scene or sequence or act, let's say. So it's a visual cue for the audience. So how do you do that as an editor? How do you add these transitions? So there are two ways to do it. The first way is pretty easy, but lacks a little bit of control. And you'll see what I mean in a second in terms of what the editor can do. So this is probably the easiest way to do it, but again, it lacks a little bit of control. So basically, highlight the two staples here. Just want them as white, and right click, then transitions, and then dissolve. Okay, so that should be familiar. All right, and there's the fade out. So that's a pretty easy way to do a fade out. You can also do this as a same process as a fade in as well. But I'm going to undo that. The best way to do this to maximize the level of control that you have as the editor is to keyframe. So go into the visual effects here, click on that tab, and so we're working on this clip here. And I already have an effect added, which is indicated by the blue square there. And the effect that is added is exactly what I need. I need the DVE effect. And in that effect, I'm going to enable the opacity. Okay. So now I can apply keyframes for the opacity. And so what I want to do is basically move my playhead to where I want the dissolve or the fade out to start. Let's say I want the fade out to start about halfway through the clip there. Now, this is a little bit different. I'm going to actually add a keyframe here. Now, I can add a keyframe using the graph, so I can click there. I'm going to undo that. I can also add a keyframe just by adding the plus or pressing the plus button here. So add a keyframe. Okay, and then, so two ways to add a keyframe there. Then I'm just going to drag down this last keyframe that indicates the last, basically the last frame of the clip. So I'm going to drag that down to 0. The other way that I can do that, of course, and perhaps the easiest way, is make sure the frame or the playhead is lined up on the keyframe just by clicking the arrows. You see the arrows actually move the playhead to the keyframes. Then I can just go in and hit 0 like that. That's much faster. So there is my fade out now. And what this allows me to do is it allows me to have greater control over the length of the fade out or fade in if I'm applying a fade in. Fading in is just the opposite. You go from 0 opacity to 100% opacity. What if I want to adjust the duration of that fade? All I need to do is just click drag the keyframe like so. So say I want it to be a really short fade out. So here's what it looks like. So that has a much different aesthetic effect than a long, slow fade out. Okay, so one might be considered more dramatic than the other. Okay, applying effects and adding keyframes is as simple as that. Notice in Lightworks, that in the VFX panel, you have a multitude of effects: color, DVE, keying, mats. All of these can be keyframed. All of them have different, stylistic, aesthetic characteristics. So take the time and experiment with some of these effects and see what they can do for you. We're also going to be applying text effects as well, and I'll do a demonstration on how to apply a text. It's pretty much follows the same process, so you can experiment with that. And note the studio assignments that text overlays are required. All right, so Studio 7, Studio 8 for sure. Let me know if you have any questions, post to the forum. And the next video, I'm going to talk about basic audio, fade in, fade out, and just working with audio in a very general sense to get you going on how to edit and create a nice audio composition to accompany your video.